Nice to see you. Came to hear you. Hello, Ambassador Good. My name's Cole.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Asia Society. I'm Tom Nagorski. I'm the Executive Vice President here. Thank you for starting your morning and your week with us. I want to welcome members of the press, members of the diplomatic community, in particular Consul General Ambassador Kim from Korea, who is here this morning. Our trustee Denise Saul is here, and trustee emeritus Jerry Cohen. Great to have you as well. We have what should be a terrific event this morning. We always aim to have a nice mix of timely subjects with great guests to discuss them, but I don't think we've often had a combination of a subject quite this timely and guests as really superbly qualified from a diverse range of backgrounds to take it on. Before we get started, just a couple of words about upcoming Asia Society events, and while we're dealing with superlatives, I want to mention this Thursday night, you're invited to join us for an absolutely great and inspiring speaker. Vikash Khanna will be here. For those of you who don't know him, he's, first of all, one of the world's top chefs. He's an incredible photojournalist and, above all, an absolutely interesting and inspiring human being to spend time with and listen to. And if you don't believe me, you can ask Barack Obama, Narendra Modi, the Dalai Lama, the Pope, and the Queen of England. And that's because Vikash Khanna, this is true, has had audiences with every one of them. And you can too. That's this Thursday evening at the Asia Society. A little further down the calendar, we open a special summer exhibition here. Not something we do often. It's called Lucid Dreams, June the 30th, featuring great young artists from South Asia who now live in this country. And on July the 13th at the lunch hour, we have a special event on Hong Kong as it inaugurates a new chief executive and marks 20 years since the handover from Great Britain to China. But let's come now to the Korean Peninsula, and in some ways, this is what has been known and is known still in the newsroom as an evergreen story. Our moderator tonight will know what I mean. Frozen in time, no peace treaty, formal one since the Korean War, no movement really to open the North to outsiders, very little back-channel diplomacy that seems to get us very far. But in other ways, it's not really evergreen at all at the moment. It's changing rapidly, as most of you will know, and changing in not particularly good ways, even by the standards of volatility that we who follow the Korean Peninsula have come to expect. It is really, really volatile at the moment. Just to frame things very briefly here, you have the impeachment of a South Korean president and the election of a new one who holds a different view of how to handle the crisis. We've had the election of an American president whose statements have injected uncertainty into U.S. policy throughout the region. We've just seen the terrible story unfold of the young American who came home last week from North Korea in a coma. And all the while, of course, we're watching a clear march by the North Koreans to the point at which they'll be able to mount a nuclear warhead on a ballistic missile and fire it a long way. From the White House, we have heard that some time ago now, but that's brief and kind of remarkable phrase. After speaking to China's President Xi Jinping, Donald Trump said, "North Korea is complicated." And while President Trump seemed to believe that he had won China's agreement to rein in China's support, economic support for the North, there are real questions as to whether that's borne fruit. And so what we have are nerves rattling from Beijing to Seoul, from Tokyo to Seattle, and of course all the way to Washington and here in New York. And what a group we have with us this morning. You have their bios. I'll just briefly give you some high points from those and also how this will go. We're going to begin this morning with remarks from Ro Myung-gong, Chairman of the East Asia Foundation, Chair Professor of International Studies at Dongseo University. He served in many diplomatic posts for his country, including ultimately as Minister of Foreign Affairs. We're delighted, sir, to have you with us. Then will come the panel discussion, all actually making return visits to our stage. Chung-In Moon, Special Advisor to the new President, Moon Jae-in, for Unification, Foreign and National Security Affairs. Mr. Moon is also Distinguished Professor at Yonsei University and Editor-in-Chief of Global Asia. Welcome, sir, to you. Sumi Terry, Managing Director for Korea at Bauer Group Asia, previously a Senior Research Scholar at Columbia University's Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and a National Intelligence Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations down the block. She served before that in various U.S. government capacities, Deputy National Intelligence Officer for East Asia at the National Intelligence Council, Director for Korea, Japan, and Oceanic Affairs at the National Security Council, and earlier worked at the CIA as a senior analyst on Korean issues. And Danny Russell, who I'm very proud for at least a year now to call colleague, diplomat in residence, senior fellow at the Asia Society Policy Institute. Frequent guests will have seen him here already. He has most recently served as Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in the Obama administration and was actually Special Assistant to President Obama for Asian Affairs, what you call the point person for a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today. Delighted that Danny is with us. And if all that wasn't enough, delighted to welcome back to the Asia Society to moderate this program the great author and journalist Barbara Demick, New York Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times, formerly head of the paper's bureaus in Beijing and Seoul, author of, most recently, a great book. I don't normally do this, but I've just finished it, Nothing to Envy. It's a prop. See all the cameras, Barbara, looking at that? Good. Ordinary Lives in North Korea. It really is it's not a new book, but it's an extraordinary look for all the other things you can read about North Korea, a look at people who have lived there. And it's a very human book as opposed to just a geopolitical and strategic story. Barbara's won many awards, including one which we bestow here at the Asia Society, the Osborne Elliott Prize for Excellence in Journalism about Asia. So thank you all for being here, guests and speakers alike. And to get us started, as I said, opening remarks from His Excellency, the former Foreign Minister of South Korea, Mr. Ro Myung-gong. Sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to speak this esteemed audience this morning on behalf of the East Asia Foundation. In fact, this is almost 30 years, some 30 years ago, I was Consul General here in New York, and I'm frequent visitors to this society, but I am speaking today in a different capacity. Well, in fact, I didn't use English for the last 20 years or so since I left office, so my English is going to be very faltering, and please excuse me. This time, our delegation consists of a number of distinguished people from Korea. Particularly today in New York, we have two gentlemen from our National Assembly. Dr. Hong Ik-pyo is a member of the government party, and he is one of the experts on inter-Korean affairs, and he is sitting in the floor, but maybe you can direct questions to him later. The another gentleman is Mr. Kim Jong-dae, a member of Justice Party. Can I call it Justice Party or 정의당? Should it be? Is opposition party, but very friendly to the government in power. And his nickname is Mr. Saad, and his nickname indicates he's well conversed in defense affairs, and in fact, a member of the defense committee as well. And now, there on my subject, I'll speak mainly based on my paper. Looking back at the shared history between our two countries, the alliance between the Republic of Korea and the US has withstood the test of time and changes for nearly 7 decades. The ties that was formed between our two countries out of the ashes of the Korean War is a bond that was built on mutual trust and respect. It is a bond that cannot be broken and bond that will endure for generations. Our two countries share common values and belief in democracy, human rights, and the free market economy. Even during the most trying times, our two countries have stood side by side to defend these values and way of life. Majority of South Korean people will continue to do so in the future. Recent changes, however, in the leadership and political climate in our respective countries have caused some to be apprehensive about the future of Korea-US alliance. President Trump has forewarned that his administration will examine US foreign policies, including its policies toward East Asia. While the new administration's foreign policy in East Asia has not been fully introduced, President Trump has stated that his administration will give priority to the solution of North Korean issue, which we sincerely welcome. He has opened possibilities for every measure, including military ones, to deal with North Korea. On the other hand, the newly inaugurated President Moon Jae-in of Korea has stressed the need for dialogue and diplomatic solutions in dealing with North Korea, while he sternly warned North Korea for any further provocations, and he will retaliate with a robust US-Korea alliance. I want to emphasize that surgical military strike against North Korea is a not viable option. More than 20 million people living in metropolitan Seoul, which count roughly 40% of the total population in the south, are within the range of North Korean long-range guns and rockets. North Korea's retaliation against preemptive surgical strike would have disastrous consequences for South Korea. Defense Secretary Mattis recently said that a military means is unrealistic. Maybe he had that in mind. The uncertainty regarding how our respective governments will address the North Korean issue has been a cause for consternation. Some observers see possible policy gaps in the approaches of our respective newly installed governments. There are other aspects of our alliance that our governments will need to address. President Trump's America First policy has raised questions relating to defense cost sharing, including the issue of THAAD deployment. Even the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement, which has bound the two markets into one, is being pointed out as a target for possible renegotiation. These developments are undoubtedly challenges to our two countries and their relation. However, we must not falter in these challenging times. North Korea has continued its unceasing linksmanship by launching 10 missiles this year alone. Unfortunately, UN sanctions have not been effective in curbing North Korea's dangerous, aggressive behavior. Our two governments need to cooperate and coordinate closely with each other more than ever in order to prevent the escalation of crisis in the Korean Peninsula and find a way to ensure lasting peace and stability. In a congratulatory call to President Moon on President Moon's inauguration, President Trump expressed that our alliance is a great alliance. And President Moon reaffirmed that the Korea-US alliance has been the backbone of Korea's foreign and security policies for a long time, and will remain so in the future as well. The Korea-US alliance has been tested through wars in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And South Korea has participated in all these campaigns, shoulder to shoulder with the US. Our two great nations enjoy a battle-tested bond of friendship and trust. With the backdrop, the two presidents will meet in Washington, D.C. at the end of this month. Whatever apprehension and concern are said about the Republic of Korea-US alliance has been the bedrock of our stability in the Korean Peninsula and the key ingredient that has ensured peace and prosperity in North Asia. To preserve and solidify this alliance, the two countries will need to continue to engage with each other with the goal of enhancing mutual understanding and cooperation. I hope that today's dialogue will help further this common goal of enhancing mutual understanding and cooperation between our two countries. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. Really appreciate your being here and those very compelling remarks to get us started. Now, you've heard who's coming to the stage, so I'm just back up here to say, please welcome them to the stage.
Sit on a name. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and Minister Gong, that was very informative and will set the stage for the rest of the talk. I'm going to start with the gentleman to my right, Professor Chung-In Moon. Since everybody got up so early today to get to breakfast, you may have missed some of the back and forth, but Professor Moon, who I know back from the Romulan days and going quite a bit back, has some opinions about what it would take to get dialogue going again with North Korea and the United States. And it, I think, involves some concessions on the part of the United States in terms of joint exercises. And those remarks, again, if you haven't read the paper, have been a bit controversial. So you're on the hot seat.
Anyway, can't you give me more specific questions? Too general.
Too general. Well, you could, I guess, speak about what it was that is your suggestion for getting the talks going again, which I believe is some reduction in the joint exercises between the U.S.?
No, what I talked about, the South Korean media people is this, the immediate goal of our effort should be freeze North Korean nuclear and missile activities. And in return, we could scale down ROK-US joint military exercise and training. Of course, our ultimate goal is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but we can start with freezing activities, okay? But some of our friends in Korea are extremely sensitive to the term scaling down of ROK-US, joint military exercise and training. But I think, negotiation all about the give and take, is two-party negotiations. Therefore, what I mentioned is that one. And I think, of course, there should be full consultation with the United States. South Korea cannot take unilateral action because the exercise itself is, combined forces in exercise. Therefore, with full consultation with the United States, I think our president and American president can find to reduce tension on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay. And why is this so sensitive? I think you were rebuked a bit by President Moon's office.
But to be honest with you, we have this kind of tendency that that we demand unilateral, scaling down of North Korean nuclear activities, missile activities, and etc. Therefore, what I'm simply saying is that there got to be some kind of parallel, format. Okay, we need to come up with some incentive, so that we can make North Korea change its provocative behavior. But general conservative public in South Korea, it's not really acceptable to that idea. North Korea made a crime, therefore we got to punish. Therefore, it is North Korea who should change its behavior first. Then we can come up with some kinds of, measures. Therefore, then that is really, against action for action formula. And nothing can be done on the Korean Peninsula through that kind of formula. That is my personal belief. By the way, I do not speak for the government, okay? I speak for myself.
I'm going to go to Dr. Terry, who I believe met with some North Korean diplomats recently and has a perspective on the North Korea view on this. We were discussing it a bit before.
Right. So I am one of the more hardline thinkers, I guess, when it comes to North Korea. But I met the, North Koreans in Sweden early this month, and I was pessimistic to begin with, but when I met them and had this in-depth discussion for 3 days, including drinking and eating at night and trying to get cozy with each other, I came away even more pessimistic than ever before because, and this is not myself, my American counterpart also had the same view, and the Swedish guys who hosted the whole event said North Koreans right now, they emphasize over and over, denuclearization is completely off the table. We're smoking something if we think this is something that's achievable. They said this is not negotiable, it's over, it's done, this is not something that we can talk about. We will meet and talk about peace treaty, peace regime, and having that conversation. But we are so they said, they emphasized on one thing. Second thing they emphasized is we're so close to completing the nuclear program. We're so close to perfecting this nuclear arsenal. We did not come this far. And then they, predictably gave us the example of Libya, Iraq, and say, of course, from our perspective, this is the only means of regime survival. So we're this close, so that's off the table. And the third thing that really gave me some interesting impression is that how little they regard, to respect to South Korean colleagues here, I know South Korean government doesn't want to hear this, but North Koreans have said, and when we talk about peace treaty, it is with the United States. US is our counterpart. South Korea, you are puppet of the United States, and we don't even need to have you in this discussion. So it was very frustrating, the whole event, to see how much the South Koreans want. It's like, what can we do to give, what can we do to improve relationship? What can we do to improve bilateral relations? And I just don't think that's necessarily is going to get to if our goal still is denuclearization. And I think then we need to be very clear about that. Is this a realistic goal? I know we will always forever say that because we cannot not say that, right? But I just think it's almost like we are just in the same cycle, and we're not moving ahead, and we're not even thinking about what's. So we just have a fundamentally different perspective on this, and this is sort of my takeaway, which was, very, very depressing. And I'm sorry to report that, but that's just the state that we're in.
I'll go to former Assistant Secretary of State, Danny Russell. We're very lucky to have you here in a setting where you can hopefully speak honestly. You know, we have a new president in South Korea, a new president in the United States who has a way of making off-the-cuff comments. They're going to meet later this month. Well, what could possibly go wrong? What could go right?
Well, thanks, Barbara. And by the way, I was honest in my official government.
Okay.
I'm just a little more guarded.
Okay. Well, even with us,
I was speaking as the Asia Society Policy Institute Senior Fellow. Look, this is a meeting between two new presidents, both of whom have very significant domestic political issues to deal with, both of whom are in the early stages, the kind of shakedown cruise and getting their systems operating, and both of whom have some pretty significant on-the-record baggage in terms of public statements that they have made about the issue, about the situation on the Korean Peninsula. So one important aspect of a summit meeting, and I think it's a fortuitous thing that it's coming early in the Moon administration, is that it's an opportunity for the leaders themselves to engage directly. And in both cases, both the Moon presidency and the Trump presidency are, clearly leader-led, if not top-heavy. There is, however, a tremendous amount of work, and I've lived this repeatedly, hosting and preparing President Obama for summits in Korea, a tremendous amount of work that goes on in the system at staff level, at the cabinet level, to lay the groundwork for a meeting. Typically, it focuses on either a joint statement of the two leaders or parallel statements, but this gets oven ready, shall we say, before the meeting itself. And the obvious areas of focus will be, in the first instance, on the alliance. And alliance questions will revolve around the strength and vigor with which President Moon affirms and reaffirms his commitment, and ditto President Trump reaffirms his commitment. Questions about the timing of operational wartime control and the transfer thereof, what are the conditions for that? Questions around host nation support and burden sharing, and questions, of course, importantly, around the THAAD system. 2 THAAD batteries are in place, 4 are on hold. President Moon has talked about an extended environmental impact assessment. He's talked about the National Assembly conducting a review. What does this really mean, and what can the two leaders tell the whole world about their intent with regard to the alliance? Second big issue is North Korea policy. What are the areas of convergence, of divergence? They frankly have a lot in common. But the challenge is going to be to see where the distribution is among the focus on the nuclear issue, the focus on engagement, the focus on human rights. What's the right ratio? And with respect to the nuclear issue, what's the balance between maximum pressure, as the Trump administration puts it, and engagement? They're not contradictory, but it isn't the easiest thing in the world to establish what the right overlap and balance is. The third thing with any summit meeting is how it is received by publics. And in this case, I think the publics that will matter a great deal, or at least the audiences that will matter a great deal, are, in the first instance, the South Korean public, which is quite divided. But secondly, how will the Chinese and the North Koreans respond to what they hear from President Trump and from President Moon? I think that Professor Moon said the critical piece, namely that whatever decisions ultimately get made, whatever the shape of policy is with respect to North Korea, these decisions, these policies have got to be arrived at jointly between Seoul and Washington. Dividing the alliance, breaking the alliance has been a major goal for North Korea, and frankly something that the Chinese would not be too unhappy to see for a long time, and it's something that we have to avoid at all costs.
I think President Moon will be paying really a lot of attention, on what Ambassador Russell said, there is one is really strengthening ROK-US alliance. Okay? And it has many aspects, like how to strengthen combined forces command capability, and also how to assure extended deterrence in light of North Korea's increasing nuclear threat. You know, those things will be the very important elements. And another element is how to come up with collective wisdom to deal with North Korean nuclear threat. And that will be a very important issue. And third one is how to reduce tension on the Korean Peninsula and how the US and South Korea can work together for the creation of peace on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, those are the very important agenda I think our government is currently thinking, deliberating on. Another important point is, as Ambassador Russell pointed out, both sides agreed that the US and South Korea will engage any kinds of dialogue with North Korea on the right conditions. There could be some difference in defining what is meant by right condition, but I think that there is a full contestation between National Security Council of the American government and National Security Council of South Korean government. Therefore, I don't see any major distraction during the summit. And also President Moon is very committed to the summit. He's preparing extremely hard. Therefore, I don't see any problem with the summit.
Could I ask, I don't know if you've been involved in this personally, what advice has been given to President Moon about how to deal with President Trump? This is not your conventional U.S. president.
No, but I think there is just, there is some concern on the part of the South Korean government, but they strongly believe that there could be yin and yang alchemy. Our President Moon Jae-in is very sincere, very candid, very truth-speaking in a person, and American president is somewhat outgoing. Therefore, there could be some kinds of harmony of yin and yang, so that we believe that there could be some productive result between the two leaders.
Barbara, just because I think your point is a good one, because with this president, I think establishing right chemistry and right rapport is so important. I mean, there are all these very important issues, and you're studying them very hard. But I don't know if Mr. Trump is necessarily going to be studying these issues very hard about it. I think it's all about establishing rapport. And when you see what happened with Prime Minister Abe and Xi Jinping after that 10-minute conversation, now you can work with China, you can, and you had a much better relationship with China. So they both had very successful meetings with Mr. Trump, just all based on how it went. And so I think particularly with this summit, and particularly with this U.S. president, I think this would be a key instead of trying to drill down to at the summit level.
Yeah, I'm going to ask about the South Korean public for a moment. And Professor Moon, you're the only one who lives in Korea at the moment, but Dr. Terry visits frequently, and I value her opinions, especially her candor. I mean, what I've read is that a lot of South Koreans are quite frightened of the Trump administration. I saw many stories in the last few months about, sort of what we call vox pops of South Koreans saying, oh, we're not afraid of Kim Jong-un, we're afraid of Trump, that he'll do something, he's the wild card. How does President Moon handle that? The fears of his own people sitting down with President Trump. I'm going to let you start. And
are you going to ask me?
I'm going to ask you, yes.
I think this is really this is a very difficult question, and you can understand why South Korea or any other country would be very apprehensive about, because Mr. Trump has said a lot of things about a lot of countries, and with even South Korea, look at some of the things he said. Forget the whole burden sharing, or that South Korea should pay the $1 billion THAAD system, or that after Xi Jinping, that whole 10-minute conversation, he just learned how complicated things are and how South Korea was part of China. And that just absolutely made South Koreans hysterical, and you can understand why. My advice would be not to get hung up on every single thing that Mr. Trump says, and I certainly can't sit here and defend or try to even explain many of his comments or tweets, but he does go back on them. So I think the valuable lesson is not to get hung up on these things and try to, again, when you have a meeting, try to establish that relationship, that trust, and that foundation, and then try to work through these issues one by one. I mean, that's...
Look, it's very important not to scare the wrong Korean.
Right.
I completely agree with that. But look, the Trump administration and Kim Jong-un are engaged in what lack of a better term, you could call psychological warfare. As Sue explained, Kim Jong-un is trying to convince the world that it's hopeless. It's a lost cause. North Korea has crossed the Rubicon. They're a nuclear power. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and so you might as well get used to it. And since their capacity to wreak havoc is so phenomenal, it's better to buy them off, to pay them off. Wouldn't we rather have a period of quiet, even if their centrifuges were spinning in the background, even if their technology continued to advance? At least there wouldn't be these big explosive nuclear detonations or missile launches. This is his gambit. It's a pretty conventional shakedown, familiar to anybody who watched movies about gangsters in New York or Chicago. Conversely, the game for the Trump administration, and let's face it, President Trump is the 5th president in a row that has had to deal with the prospects of a nuclear North Korea. And no U.S. president is going to accept that North Korea is a legitimate nuclear state. That won't happen. What the U.S., South Korea, and others in the international community are trying to do, need to do, is to create a set of circumstances in which Kim Jong-un is forced to conclude that his efforts just aren't working. And that since North Korea as an economy is not a viable proposition, they need a lot of external support. They need access to the international financial and transportation infrastructure. Can Kim Jong-un be convinced that this is just not working? Nothing that he does is making North Korea a strong and prosperous nation. Nothing that he does is convincing the international community to relent and accept North Korea as a Pakistan, as an India. Nothing that he is doing is weakening the U.S.-ROK alliance. In fact, it's strengthening the U.S.-ROK alliance and the U.S.-Japan alliance and increasing trilateral coordination and infuriating China to boot. This is not a tenable proposition, and time is not on his side. This is what the effort by President Trump, Secretary Mattis, Tillerson aims at doing, creating an environment in which, since giving up his nuclear capacity is, as Sue pointed out, the last thing on earth the North Koreans want to do, making it the last thing on earth that Kim Jong-un can do in order to hold things together in Pyongyang.
But going back to your earlier question, what is the South Korean perception of President Trump? Initially, we were extremely concerned, but after having witnessed, President Trump's summit with President Xi and President Abe, as Dr. Terry pointed out, we thought he can be extremely pragmatic, and particularly if there is a personal alchemy between the two leaders, we can expect very productive outcomes. But going back to Ambassador Russell's point, yes, crime and punishment, maximum pressure in North Korea could work, but there are some concerns on the part of South Koreans. That is what time may not be on our side. Okay? North Korea could eventually acquire nuclear weapons, undertake 6 nuclear testing, acquire international, intercontinental ballistic, missile, and etc. Then the environment for negotiation might become much more complicated and tougher. And then another concern is this: if that continues, then we could encounter major catastrophe on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, particularly liberal forces in South Korea are concerned on those two aspects. That is, if time may not be on our side, and if we mismanage, there could be a catastrophic outcome on the Korean Peninsula. Then eventual victims will be South Koreans primarily. And that is our really concern. Therefore, I hope the two leaders would come up with some Solomon's wisdom in dealing with North Korea. I know that Dr. Terry is extremely pessimistic, but I hope the two leaders can come up with some good solution.
You just heard two very different perspectives on how to get there. And I do agree that time is not on our side because they're just continually developing a missile nuclear capability. But the question is, how do we get there? We're on one hand, what we are saying is, We need to, the maximum pressure is about trying to get Kim Jong-un to realize that the last possible solution is like regime survival. The nuclear weapons is the only way to regime survival. No, this is how you're going to lose regime survival. So we're trying to get them to understand that. Somebody mentioned earlier about sanctions, how sanctions have not been effective. But on the pressure side, we can't quite say the sanctions have not been effective because strong sanctions have been really in place since maybe February, March of last year. It's not something that's been around for a decade. And when you look at Iran sanctions have been in place for 3 years. We have secondary sanctions in place. So when you compare to some other countries, the pressure has not been maximized on North Korea. And as you know, for sanctions to work, you really need enforcement. This is why Mr. Trump has gone to Xi Jinping, and this were the previous presidents as well, trying to get China to play ball. And if China does not play ball, I think Washington's next step is to go pursue secondary sanctions against Chinese entities and banks that do illicit business with North Korea, which is, again, fundamentally at odds with, I think, where the Moon administration is in terms of how they think we should improve relations with North Korea. So we can say all the nice things here, but I do think that we have some different approach here that we need to eventually come together, because as Benny said, the most important thing is for Seoul and Washington to stay on the same page when we deal with North Korea.
Look, South Korean government has been complying with the international, sanction regime. We have been fully complying with, United Nations Security Council Resolution 2270 and United Nations Security Council Resolution 2321. Therefore, and we closed the Kaesong Industrial Complex. We closed the Mount Kumgang Tourist Project. Therefore, at present moment, we are part of that maximum pressure in North
But
Korea.
the issue obviously is China. It's not.
It's up to you. The China is your count, but then the South Korean count.
We should have a Chinese delegate. I want to go on to another subject. Let's talk about talking, because so many things have been tried by the previous administrations. Do we have to defend strategic patience? I don't think so. Let's just move on. Let's talk about talking. I mean, President Trump said during the campaign he'd have a hamburger with Kim Jong-un. Now we're back to a situation that looks sort of like 2000, the year that you had the summit between the two Kims. I think something you were involved with. Madeleine Albright went to Pyongyang. Do you see an opportunity in this constellation for direct talks? Do you see a possibility that President Moon would go to Pyongyang and talk to Kim Jong-un?
If the conditions are right, he may visit. But now, right now, conditions are not right. Okay, we have offered several gestures to North Korea. North Korea turned them down. Now, Otto Warmbier had the tragic return, and therefore, overall atmosphere in Washington is extremely hostile against North Korea. Therefore, in other words, and also North Korea has been continuing missile test launching. Therefore, given this kinds of behavior, it would be extremely difficult for President Moon to consider going to Pyongyang or having any meaningful interaction with North Korea. Therefore, President Moon made it very clear, okay, North Korea stop all those provocative behavior and show some kind of sincere gesture. Then, he may consider it, but under the current condition, it would be extremely difficult for him to take any initiative on North Korea. That's the reality. On the record, undecided, I'm in concurrence with Terry, Dr. Terry.
So Barbara, look, trying to come to some consensus on what conditions are really necessary for engagement is an important objective of the two presidents. But remember, talk is good, but talk is cheap. And there's a difference between talking, and there's very little value in just talking for the sake of talking, and authentic, real dialogue, let alone meaningful negotiations. I'm somebody who, I'm proud to say, was involved in successful negotiations with the North Koreans in 1994 and the agreed framework. But it takes two to tango. And both the US and the Moon government have to be careful that we don't wind up negotiating with ourselves. The North Koreans need to engage seriously, authentically, in dialogue as well as in negotiations. Because look, the only peaceful outcome to this confrontation will be through negotiations, unless there is a new and right-thinking government that emerges somehow in Pyongyang. But neither of those two things are things that the U.S. or the U.S. with the Republic of Korea can do by ourselves. We need an opposite number to negotiate with. And so I think that there is, to borrow Professor Moon's metaphor, a yin-yang synergy between maximum pressure and potential engagement. Engagement based on principle, engagement with a clear objective, which includes denuclearization. There's an important distinction between curing a problem. People are fond of saying, oh, our strategy has been a failure. Well, if you can't cure something, then you've got to manage the condition. And we have been managing it through strong deterrence and defense, managing it through tight alliance coordination and the imposition of sanctions, which create a tremendous amount of headwind on North Korea. If you're looking at the world from Kim Jong-un's point of view, it does not look like an unblemished success for your policy. And thirdly, engagement. There is going to have to be some engagement and negotiations in order to find a peaceful outcome. But until and unless the North Koreans signal that they're prepared to negotiate and negotiate on the nuclear issue, which is the crux of the matter, we'd be spinning our wheels.
Well, the question I have then is, I 100% agree, but given that I'm increasingly pessimistic that North Korea is not going to return to the table to talk about denuclearization, what is the realistic long-term option? I know we might not, what is the realistic long-term option? And I think at the end of the day, and again, you know, I'm just speaking candidly because I'm not in the government. I think long-term solution really comes down to two options, which is deterrence, living with it, right? Given if they're not going to give it up, living with North Korean threat while not acknowledging that they're not acknowledging it, but with deterrence and continuing pressure. And everyone hates to talk about this, but maybe even a regime change, or I'm just saying it's one option, or another option is a military option. And I think even all the hawks in the United States, no one really thinks military option is really on the table, despite what other people have said. This is why even, was it Mattis or also McMaster, who said all options will be pursued short of war. That people say all options are on the table. That's been actually, even the Obama administration always said all options are on the table. But realistically, when you look at Trump's senior officials, you know, Mattis, Tillerson, McMaster, none of these guys think that the military option is really on the table, right? Because everybody understands, forget nuclear weapons, even just conventional artillery. The North Koreans have over 10,000 conventional artillery pieces that are zeroed in on Seoul within 60 seconds of 20 million people that you're talking about. 200,000 US expats, 28,500 American soldiers. So if you have that option off the table, and I think it's not for any kind of, but I just think we need some sort of long-term thinking, because it's fine to continually, because I think we need to be prepared for the fact, while we're pursuing sanctions, maximum pressure, and trying to give them an off-ramp, when they don't, and they do get to that point where they do test a successful ICBM that can hit mainland United States, because that's the critical threshold for United States perspective. That's really, what do we do then? What are our options? So I think this is something we really have to give serious consideration.
Here's one existential dilemma.
Yeah.
We are relying on sanctions and pressures in North Korea. North Korea perceives sanctions and pressure as a hostile act and hostile intention and act on our side. Then there is no common ground for trust. Therefore, how to break that dilemma would be the most important task for us. Okay. Therefore, taking sanctions, of course, deterrence is the foundation of our alliance with the United States. Okay. We're strengthening alliance. Okay. We'll be ready to really come up with any kind of second strike against North Korea. Okay. However, how to go beyond that one, that is really a critical question for us.
Professor Moon, when we're on the subject, do you see a return to the kind of sunshine policy exchanges we saw under Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, where you have exchanges of sports teams, cultural events, the roads opening, maybe Mount Kumgang? Are we going to go back to that?
may not be, but there is I would say that the sunshine policy is one of the most misunderstood policy in and out. The first principle of sunshine policy is that non-tolerance of a military provocation by the North. The security is first. And second, then if that is being kept, then we would not achieve unification by absorption, by fostering regime collapse in North Korea. Third, we'll promote exchange and cooperation, build trust, and achieve peaceful coexistence, and eventually achieve de facto unification in which people, goods, and services can move freely between North and South. And I wouldn't say that the Kim Moon-jae government just literally adopted the sunshine policy, but his primary emphasis on security throughout the campaign, even now, his primary emphasis on, has been on security. Therefore, there will be no compromise on that issue. Then, as to going back to, as Barbara said, then can he, reopen gasoline industrial complex and Mount Kumgang project and promote in other kinds of things? He would do it. Something like, for example, North Korean team is coming to attend the taekwondo contest in South Korea led by Jang-un. That kind of things could be possible, but it would be extremely difficult for the Moon Jae-in government to take any actions that can benefit financially North Korean nuclear or missile program, and it would be extremely difficult. And that could be also violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions.
I also wanted to ask you before I let you go about THAAD. This is supposed to be a purely defensive weapon system. Why is it so controversial? Why are the Chinese objecting? Why?
I would say that President Moon is, of course, Chinese sanctions and its economic impact, it's a reality. A lot of small, medium firms doing tourism, cultural activities are suffering a lot. But President Moon's position is very simple. First of all, he reassured the deployment of THAAD. That's a period. However, there are legal and procedural matters. During the previous government, there was what Mr. Kim called the speed limit violation on the part of Park Geun-hye government. The previous government didn't go to so-called legal and procedural matters. Even, for example, okay, let me tell you very frankly, we have an environmental impact law which has a provision on the exemption of environmental impact statement if that facility is considered classified military facility. But problem is that the defense minister of previous government went to the Seongju area and told the citizens there, we will take an environmental impact statement. Okay, that was the beginning of the problem. Then current government had to comply with that promise by the previous government.
I don't mean to sound too Trumpian here, but isn't this environmental impact, isn't that kind of an excuse?
No, I don't think so. Don't take it lightly. Look, Korea is the country. Like when I went to Washington, a lot of people talk about that kind of things. Even Sumi Terry is smiling in that way. But look, Korea is where president was impeached. Okay, people power, rule of law, democracy really matter. Who elected Moon Jae-in as a president? Those people who support rule of law and democracy. Therefore, President Moon cannot take their demand lightly. Therefore, it might take some time, but eventually President Moon will resolve the THAAD issue, and therefore THAAD issue won't be a major hindrance to the strengthening of our local-US alliance. I can assure you.
Look, the THAAD system is a purely defensive system that is state-of-the-art, that protects the Republic of Korea and the U.S. forces on Korea from ballistic missiles. The tremendous progress, the race to develop ballistic missiles on the part of North Korea makes it necessary to upgrade our defense. And the government of the Republic of Korea is responsible for proceeding in a manner that's consistent with its own laws and that is acceptable to its own citizens. But this was an alliance decision. And I think that the onus will be on President Moon when he sits down with President Trump to ensure that he can find a way forward to deploy a system that will protect the lives of the citizens of the Republic of Korea, which is job number one for the president, but to do so in a way that's acceptable and consistent with legal requirements at home.
Did you want to jump into this?
Just one thing, I agree with that. I think, so the challenge for the Moon administration is how do you deal with this? How do you balance this transparency issue, accountability issue? And let's face it, it's really pressure from China, right? I mean, you have a whole host of environment, this and that. I really think the China reason is probably that trumps the other reasons. But how do you balance all of this and not, because it's a perception issue, and not give this wrong impression to the United States that you are really risking security. And as Danny said, it's not only just South Korean security, we also, from American perspective, that protects American soldiers in South Korea. So I think this potentially is a little bit of delay for environmental review, this and that, but getting back to that will be essential. Otherwise, I would think that this could be potentially a challenge, a real strain in the alliance.
I'd just like to go back to you, the question that probably you don't want to answer. Who is really handling Korea policy for this administration? And when President Moon goes in to negotiate with President Trump, does he see himself as negotiating with the U.S. government? You have, obviously some disagreements between the White House and the State Department. There was an interesting piece in today's New York Times saying the Republican Congress is doing its own foreign policy, often at odds with the White House. I mean, who are the South Koreans supposed to be negotiating with?
Well, first of all, I don't think that President Moon is here to negotiate with President Trump. I think he's here to consult. We're allies. We're friends. We've got, as Minister Gong mentioned, a phenomenal decades-long track record of very, very tight coordination, and it's fully my expectation that President Moon will engage in that same spirit. As I said before, a lot of policy work gets done, embassy to foreign ministry, Secretary of State to foreign minister, defense secretary to counterpart, national security advisor to counterpart. And in fact, not only Vice President Pence, but also Secretary of Defense Mattis and Secretary of State Tillerson have already visited Korea since the Trump administration has come into office. And President Moon sent a very senior, very good envoy to the United States immediately after he took office. And Korea has some talented diplomats here in the United States. So there's a very wide spectrum of government-to-government communication. Now, within the U.S. government, look, it's not a secret that the administration is still on its shakedown cruise. It's working out some of the systems, and there are a number of positions, including my former position as Assistant Secretary, that haven't been filled with administration appointees. But there's an immensely competent set of institutions, the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security Council. They can provide very, very good, very thoughtful input and advice to the president. The president himself will, I think, like many leaders, put a great value on information that he gets from his peers. And it was clear from the meeting that President Trump had with Shinzo Abe, as well as with Xi Jinping, that he was learning from counterparts. Now, I, for one, would rather have the President of the United States learn from an ally. And I think what President Moon can share with him about Korea's history, not as a part of China, about the North Korean policy. And as Professor Moon has pointed out, about the importance of finding ways to talk, engage, and negotiate with North Korea, that can have a very salutary effect.
Does President Moon play golf?
No, he doesn't play golf. He hikes Himalaya mountains.
That would be, I don't think that would be a good joint activity for them.
But I think President Trump will really like, President Moon Jae-in, because perhaps two reasons. First, he's the son of a North Korean refugee who came during the height of the Korean War. You remember January 4th, 1951, after Chinese, made a human wave in North Korea. His father left North Korea and settled in South Korea. Therefore, he's the son of North Korean refugee. And second, he served in Special Forces Command. He parachuted. Okay. Therefore, he's a very unique South Korean president who had that kind of military background as a soldier. Therefore, I think those kind of things can, ring a bell to President Trump.
Okay. All right, I think we are going to open this up to the Q&A. And I think I saw this hand first. If you would please introduce yourself, and I don't have a second hand. Try to keep the question relatively brief.
There's a question here.
Yep.
With him.
Oh, sorry.
Jerry Cohen, NYU, and the Council on Foreign Relations. This is a terrific talk. It's very frank, very honest, and we haven't taken it further as far as it should go. Why do the Chinese fear that? And is it adjustable? Is it also adjustable to meet the so-called environmental concerns? In most countries, if you have an environmental impact assessment, one option is maybe the project will fail. Another is you adjust the project to whatever defects it seemed to have. Can the Chinese suggest adjustments to the environment that might be helpful? Let's talk about China and THAAD, because that's the most immediate question. The long-run question is the one Ms. Terry mentions. We're going to have to get used to North Korea retaining nuclear weapons, whatever our rationale for accepting it. There's got to be thought reform on our part, too. But the most immediate question I see is this THAAD question. I'd love to hear people's assessment of it. Is it adjustable? So we can have the kind of compromise that Professor Moon has referred to.
I should translate if it will take time.
Okay, all right.
It's okay? If you agree.
If he's willing, if he's willing, I think we have.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll go to you.
But I think our government is now has set up the special task force team to deal with that issue. Okay, therefore, how to fasten the process of environmental impact statement provision. Okay. On the other hand, they are also looking into how to persuade the Chinese government with regard to that. But Chinese concerns are basically three. First, it can undermine Chinese strategic interest by looking over the Chinese ICBMs deployed in northeastern part of China. And second concern is this: if the U.S. and South Korea deployed THAAD, then that could signal that these two countries may not want to resolve North Korean nuclear issues through dialogue and negotiations. Therefore, then that is somewhat conflictual. That can become conflictual with the Chinese interest of peaceful resolution of all pending issues through dialogue and negotiation. And third one is, if THAAD is deployed in South Korea, particularly X-band radar, could serve as a kind of integrating effect of regional theater missiles defense. Therefore, then that would be aiming at China. Therefore, those three things. But I think our government will work very hard to persuade the Chinese government and how to come up with a technical adjustment to relieve their security concerns. But another important thing is the U.S. got to talk with China. Okay? It's an American weapon system to be operated by Americans. Therefore, to my knowledge, has been not meaningful dialogue between Beijing and Washington over that issue. Both are really pounding on South Korea. We have become sandwiched. Therefore, I hope that China and the U.S. can have a more meaningful talks on the issue of that.
The shrimp between whales, is
Precisely.
that? Yeah.
Well, on behalf of the whales, let me pick up on what Professor Moon said in response to Jerry. So he gave three very common sense and conventional wisdom suggestions about what may be behind the Chinese objections. But the fact of the matter is that we don't know. And the fact that we don't know says it all. The Chinese will not explain what precisely the threat is that comes to China from THAAD, let alone a threat of a magnitude that it outweighs the legitimate right of self-defense against the threat of nuclear weapons by an unstable and unreliable leader who has stated publicly and shown graphically on TV that he intends to use a nuclear weapon against South Korea, Japan, and the United States. What's the reason? You want to know why there hasn't been adequate U.S.-China resolution bilaterally of the THAAD question? The Chinese don't want to discuss it. I myself have met repeatedly with Chinese counterparts. Now, it may be that they fear that this radar system will somehow impinge on China's ability to shoot intercontinental ballistic missiles and conduct a surprise nuclear attack against the United States. Guess what? China has nothing to fear. You can attack the United States with nuclear ICBMs, whether THAAD is in South Korea or not. That's frankly a bogus argument, and it's not actually the argument that the Chinese themselves are making. They're making a very vague, it's adverse to Chinese strategic interests. Now, it may also be that the Chinese console themselves with the belief that Kim Jong-un is not suicidal, that he's not really going to attack South Korea or Japan or the United States with nuclear weapons, because that would mean the end of the regime, the end of North Korea. But that's not a chance that a US president, or frankly a South Korean president, is willing to take. It's easy for the Chinese to say. Just as it's easy for them to say, oh, the US and South Korea should give up their routine defensive exercises to create an atmosphere that would perhaps lead to a freeze of North Korea's missile tests and so on. What it boils down to, Jerry, is that in the first instance, Washington and Seoul, but also Washington, Seoul, and Beijing need to deal with each other respectfully and honestly. And the application of the kind of bullying and coercive pressure that South Korea has been subject to, that the Lotte Corporation has been subject to, is incompatible with the kind of collaboration and cooperation that's going to be necessary to deal with the clear and present danger that is North Korea's nuclear missile program.
Because that explained it so well, it's 100%. I'll just add one more thing. I think the motivation is really political. It's not about that. It's about what that represents with the U.S. and South Korean alliance and so on. So I don't think there's something that can be solved. As Sandy said, we tried many times to even give them technical briefing to figure out exactly what their problem is, and they don't want that. So I think the bottom line is, I think South Korea is I think it's not understanding it correctly if they think they can appease China by delaying in this and that. I don't think China will be appeased until we completely dismantle it and take it out of South Korea.
No, it is not appeasement. You got to pay attention to Korean democracy.
Yeah,
Let's make it very clear.
I'm just saying China is not going to be satisfied until they get rid of it. I don't think any kind of fussing with it will necessarily make China happy.
What do the polls show?
Poll changes over time.
Today, they show 53% in favor of THAAD, 35% opposed to THAAD among the South Korean voters.
But it changes over time. That's true. The much larger number of South Koreans support the deployment of THAAD, but those who oppose THAAD is quite sizable too. Therefore, it's not. You cannot make a decision on the basis of just public opinion. But anyhow, I hope you can understand the agony and anxiety of our people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ken Wasserman. I'm an attorney. I visited North Korea last year. To what extent, if any, might you believe that the United States might have contributed to the geopolitical problems that exist today and might bear some responsibility for those problems?
Without a doubt, and I'm speaking as a veteran, as I said, of the 1994 agreed framework negotiations, which negotiated what I think was, on balance, a good deal, a good arrangement that held for 8+ years and failed for reasons that both North Korea and the United States must accept some responsibility. There's no doubt that there's more that the U.S. could have done. There's more that the U.S. in cooperation with others, including South Korea, could have done. But I think that we'd be missing the point if we fail to recognize that the challenge, and let's be frank, there really is no equivalent crisis or challenge anywhere in the world to the problem of North Korea, is a function of a Stalinist, Leninist dictatorship that is merciless towards its own people, that is implacably resolved to, in the first instance, use the ability to threaten its neighbors with nuclear devastation as leverage to obtain concessions and benefits, and that is in flagrant violation of international law. The root of the North Korean problem is North Korea, is North Korea's policy. And while that doesn't mean that a successful strategy can be built around the urge to punish, it does suggest that we go easy on the self-flagellation.
In the back of the room, yeah.
It's Rhonda Halby, and is it on? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's. And I was formerly writing for All My News International when I had an English edition, and now I write for tots.de. But I've followed a lot for the past 10 years or 11 years what's gone on. And I really appreciate that Professor that Professor Chung is here. Because my question goes back to September 19, 2005, the six-party agreement. And I saw that as a result of the Sunshine Policy, not as a result of sharp sanctions. But what happened with that, what broke that, wasn't that a piece of that, the Banco Delta Asia. And that was the sharp sanctions and taking North Korea out of the international banking system. And yet here we are going back to saying we have to take North Korea out of the international banking system. And what was the response to all that? Essentially, I thought China said, why doesn't North Korea negotiate with the US? But it wasn't that the US would negotiate until there was a nuclear explosion. That was the first nuclear explosion. So why don't we go back there and try to ask what happened then, and how is that similar to what we're doing now? And how do we go back and not do Banco Delta Asia, but go back to finding a way to create a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula?
But I really don't think that we can go back to the September 19th joint statement and February 13th agreement of 2007, because the conditions in North Korea have changed. But we should come up with a new kinds of formula, But still, what contained in those two documents is very important, because September 19th joint statement made it very clear North Korea will abandon its nuclear weapons, and then U.S. will guarantee non-hostile intent and policy, peaceful coexistence, and diplomatic normalization. And also even September 19th joint statement has a separate clause saying that the concerned parties, meaning North, South Korea, U.S., China, would have a separate forum and discuss the transformation of armistice agreement in a peace regime. Therefore, it has all good elements. Even February 13th agreement too. First phase, shutting down and sealing under the IA international inspection. Second, disabling nuclear facilities. And third is verifiable dismantling of nuclear materials and weapons. Those have the good elements. But after having seen what happened in Iranian deal, I think in order to have that kind of agreement, we got to prepare lots. Okay? Piece of paper won't solve the problem. There got to be much more, technical and specified, protocols and verification and all these kinds of things. Therefore, in other words, if you really wanted to resolve North Korean nuclear issues through, dialogue and negotiation, all concerned parties should prepare very well, and particularly other 5 parties should be in very close consultation.
Just on the Bank of Delta Asia sanctions, opposite argument can be made that there was one time that secondary sanctions was really effective when we sanctioned Macau-based Chinese bank and we held up $25 million of North Korean assets. And North Korean officials have even told American counterparts that you finally found a way to hurt us, except because they made it into a condition that you have to let go of the Bank of Delta Asia sanctions to get back to the talks, and that's what we did, that we didn't hold on to the secondary sanctions long enough. So opposite argument could be made on that. Just quickly on your comment, when I met with the North Koreans earlier this year, they said the fundamental problem is our system. Our system and South Korean system, meaning presidents change. So you can have an agreement. So they again brought up the point that you had an agreement. You had a Madeleine Albright, the visit, everything was going well. Bush came in, they talked about excess of evil speech and so on. So they can't fundamentally trust our system because they've seen that things change. And even after 10 years of sunshine policy under President Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, President Lee Myung-bak came in and so from North Korean perspective, it's just fundamentally you're a democracy and you can't be trusted because your system is so.
That's a good point, yeah.
Thank you. Taking my question, I'm Esther Park from KBS. I have 2 questions to Professor Moon. The first question is that you said that is very controversial in South Korea. Sometimes they cause kind of tension of democracy. Reflecting you were saying before in Washington, D.C., like said, that you said that so if United States cannot wait for some legal procedure of new South Korean government pursuing to get kind of final acceptance from the South Korean people, we cannot call ally U.S. and the South Korea if the United States cannot wait for that. So you said that finally President Moon resolved this problem and to go to the kind of that. But still, do you think that United States must wait or should better wait for the legal procedure of new South Korean government to get the full kind of or final acceptance from the South Korean people? And the second question is
Please,
that
there's quite a queue behind you, so can you speed it up a little?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So the second question is that you explained why you said that about in some conditions like the stop of provocative actions, including missile launching and nuclear test by North Korea, and reduce the joint military exercise and also the strategic military asset by U.S. surrounding Korean Peninsula that can be very sensitive, and explain that on the first question.
No, I explained in Korean
but,
Miss Media, okay.
but that is
No.
not question. My question is that so that can be a reason why the opposition party is opposing your nomination by envoy for the president. What do you think about that?
What do you mean by my nomination to the president?
Envoy
Envoy to whom?
to president, current president.
No, I'm just, I'm a special advisor. I have that position. It doesn't need any kinds of formal appointment. And as to your first question, it's very simple. I stated it, because we have a law. Our president, American forces in South Korea, cannot be above the law. Of course, our government will come up with several ways of how to expedite the process. Okay? And I think that on the occasion of our president's visit to Washington, they may come up with joint solution for that one. Therefore, in other words, we have a law, and we should comply with that law. Suppose we are deploying THAAD in, let's say, state of Ohio. Mm-hmm. Then can you do it? Can you bypass American legal procedure? Therefore, think about it in that way. And as to about your second question is this. If you go back, up until 2010, United States did not deploy strategic weapons over the Korean Peninsula during our regular joint exercise. But it was after 2010, sinking of Cheonan and Yeonpyeong shelling, the U.S. and South Korea began to deploy strategic weapons over the Korean Peninsula. And I clearly see that could be source of tension because North Korean threat perception has been heightened. Therefore, I just explained that one. Therefore, to borrow Mr. Hong's, Dr. Hong's phrase is just normalizing our old pattern of joint military exercise and training. That could be a solution, partial solution to the problem.
I think you had your hand up first. The gentleman in front of you, then you, and was there one more? These three. Sir, gentleman behind, and you're last. Okay, thanks.
Henry Segerman, International Investment Advisors. Question for Sumi Terry, because you met with the North Koreans. Once they have the ICBM that can hit the U.S., regime survival will be pretty much assured. They'll be like Russia. They can hit the U.S. so they can call the shots. In addition to regime survival, do you think they have a, secret, nostalgic desire for reunification where it would be on their terms? Like Russia basically took over Abkhazia, South Ossetia. Do they secretly harbor that desire?
Should I just answer quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think unification is a long-term goal for North Korea that they will never relinquish. It's just that, of course, practically speaking, they understand that this is something that's not quite achievable. But I do think they do have a plan. Once they have a nuclear weapons capability that could hit mainland United States, conclude a peace treaty, get U.S. forces out of Korea, break up the alliance, and then, and then that's the next step towards some sort of a unification. I don't think a unification is something that either South Korea or North Korea can give up at the end of the day. It is always a long-term vision and policy goal.
Okay, this gentleman, two over.
You can hear me now? I'm Ching Yuan, retired professor of history. I'm just curious, with this defector that recently escaped from North Korea, and he represented the highest ranked government official in North Korea, I understand, who has said that the government's very fragile and could collapse. And I'm just curious, a question for Mr. Russell, does the U.S. government have any kind of preparation just in case that North Korean regime collapsed? Back in 1988, for example, I don't think anybody really even envisaged the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the East European regimes. I'm just wondering, as one of the possible scenarios, should the regime in North Korea collapse, what would the U.S. do? And for that matter, for Professor Moon, Professor Cho, what would South Korea do?
Professor Moon is right, not Chung.
Well, look, the question of what the United States with its ally South Korea would do or what China would do in the event of a North Korean regime collapse is very situation determinant. In other words, it depends on how it happens, what happens. Clearly, the United States has a number of priorities, as does North Korea's other neighbors, and high among those priorities is avoiding what the experts call loose nukes. We don't want to see plutonium, fissile material, or nuclear devices themselves come out of control and be sold on the open market or used in a chaotic situation. We also have lots of humanitarian concerns and legitimate security concerns. All that said, the U.S. military is in the planning business and has been planning against a whole range of contingencies on the Korean Peninsula pretty much since the armistice was signed in 1953, and these are plans that are constantly developed and revised and updated. Secondly, the U.S. government and the State Department consults and confers with interested partners and allies, and does think very, very seriously, not only about the humanitarian and the security dimensions of a North Korean contingency, a collapse, a coup, something like that, but also the legal dimensions, the diplomatic dimensions, the questions about the safety and security of American citizens and third country nationals, the economic and, as I said, the humanitarian dimension, which is not only how to maintain some order and protect human life, but also how to feed people, how to provide medical care, et cetera. So, look, this is a huge aggregation of unknowns, and there are no simple and easy answers. No plan survives first contact with reality, and the reality of North Korea is of such an enigmatic nature that it's difficult to imagine that we have planned thoroughly and adequately. In the South Korean government, as Professor Moon can tell you, the Unification Ministry has for years researched, analyzed, and developed the question about the what-ifs in connection with North Korea. None of this is to suggest that we are actively plotting to bring down the Kim government. And there is an important dimension, which is what would China do, that is, I think, historically proven to be difficult to factor into the equation.
No further comments.
Okay.
You answered all the questions.
Yes, I think I promised you next.
Hi, I'm So-Young Park, student. I just wanted to ask, well, this may come off as like very naive, but I think when talking about the issue of North Korea, yes, it's like extremely dangerous situation, but I think sometimes it's easy to overlook that it's often not so much talked about as like an issue of consideration. Sorry, let's start again. An issue, I'm a little nervous, sorry. An issue that also involves the people of North Korea. And I just want to ask if there's any consideration of, like the people on that side also involved, because there is a population there involved as well. It's not just the US and South Korea populations that are in danger. So I just want to ask if, talk about there is in negotiations or like behind the scenes. I don't know if that's like classified, but yeah.
I just mentioned in the sanctions against North Korea, there's been a very explicit effort not to impose sanctions on food or anything vital to the well-being of the North Korean people.
But we have sanctioned against North Korea human rights violators and entities. And human rights is increasingly an important component in trying to solve the North Korean crisis. Where it's not shouldn't be just a nuclear crisis. It should be human rights. It should be a big component. So we are very much aware of that. I would recommend that you read the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights. That's a very detailed 400-page report on all the human rights situation in North Korea.
I would just add, speaking personally, that one of the real heartbreaks for me of working on North Korea policy has been our inability as a nation to successfully get humanitarian assistance, medicine, food, baby powder, nutritional aid for lactating mothers and so on, to North Korean citizens who need it, because the North Korean government or the Korean People's Army would routinely loot all of the assistance that we delivered. And we learned early on that we simply couldn't provide basic food aid, rice or wheat, because it all wound up in the stomachs of either the Army or the cadre, and virtually none of it got to its intended recipients.
I don't think that's the case, that virtually none of it. I mean, I think a fair percentage of it does go to the Army. And, as I understand it, what happens is that the Army will then take control of the distribution because they want it to be seen as a, gift of the North Korean government to the people. But it does trickle down, but, I do think, because I've worked with the World Food Program people, it got better over the years. Can we do one more? Yeah. I'm looking at the boss here. Okay, very purposeful hand.
Yes, I would like to ask the Special Advisor Moon.
No, Professor Moon.
Yes.
Where
that's
I get my salary, not
related
special
my
advisor. I
question.
don't get
Yeah.
salary.
You said there was a news that you are informed warning from South Korea government, especially 청와대, because of your comment on the Korea's the crisis issue. Is that true?
No comment.
And the
No
second
comment.
question is that you keep saying that this is my personal opinion, but I'm just wondering that in a way your personal opinion is different from the opinion as a special advisor to ROK President Moon.
My role is to advise the president, my private opinions. Policy making is different from my work. The Korean media confused on that one. My role is a special advice, and I give advice to president and his staff. Those who guys make the decisions, those who are in the Blue House or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and etc. Therefore, look, I'm not on the payroll of the government, okay? And I'm not in the decision-making line, okay? I can give my opinions to the president. Whether he takes it or not, it's up to him. But don't confuse. You have been glorifying my role as a special advisor. Thank you very much, but I don't need it.
I think Foreign Minister Gong would like to have a few closing words. So, please.
Thank you. I'm not posing a question. I'd like to just make a few remarks in connection with the deployment of SAD, because this SAD question is making a really huge issue between our two countries, and not only our two countries, maybe with China as well. Our foundation, the East Asia Foundation, had 2 meetings with Chinese institutions, October last year, and May this year, twice Beijing and Jeju Island. And we spoke a lot about this SAD. And of course, in the deployment of SAD, as Professor Moon mentioned, there are some legal implications in our country. But already 2 launchers are in position in Korea. And what Chinese mostly concerned about is expanded radar. And they might think that expanded radar in Korea will compromise the second strike of the ICBM against USA, particularly those are positioned in Manchuria. But we explained to them, according to our military experts, that our radar, which will be in operation, will have a range of about 600 kilometers, and solely for North Korea. And then, May this year, they made some suggestions which will make a breakthrough, if officially confirmed, that they would like to make a visit to the site, if permitted. That means that if the terminal radar is really solely for aiming for North Korea, then they might have some leeway for accepting the deployment of SAD in South Korea. Well, of course, this has to be confirmed through official channels in later, but at least there is some, leeway, I believe, and particularly in the face of a strong anti-Chinese feeling in South Korea, the Chinese is now making some way out. So it is not so disappointing at all. There is some hope without compromising our own defense capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
We should go, rush.
Okay. Get you out of here.
Want to close it out?
I think that's it. I thought we were just going to go. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for your excellent questions.
Thank you.